Archbishop Hector Aguirre, former auxiliary of Pope Francis, is not just anyone. He is one of the few who has dared to speak out harshly and clearly against the Bergoglian pontificate, denouncing its drift as few others have done. But today, after a while, Aguirre is back to make himself heard. And he does it about the new Pope, Leo XIV. His words are explosive. Stay until the end. In the Argentine ecclesial panorama, marked by complicit silences, doctrinal ambiguities, and a certain habit of navigating by sight, one voice stood out that, despite being silent for a long time, had never ceased to make consciences tremble, that of Archbishop Hector Aguirre. A prominent figure in the South American clergy, former Metropolitan of La Plata, Aguirre was for years one of the few prelates capable of speaking with disarming clarity, challenging the pastoral conformism and anodyne language that has long plagued ecclesial communication. And when he broke the silence, he did so with a text that left its mark, a true indictment that today deserves to be reread carefully. The Decadence of the Church and the Pontificate of Francis. Published when Bergoglio was still on the throne of Peter, the document was not limited to a superficial analysis. It was a theological, cultural, and historical judgment, matured over years of painful observation. Aguirre, from the heart of the very Catholic, at least on paper, Argentina, painted a dramatic picture. He denounced the collapse of ecclesial life in his country, but he did so as a paradigm of a broader degradation which affected the entire church. Deserted seminaries, dioceses where the number of bishops exceeded that of seminarians, and even century-old institutes that did not see a single entry in a year. All this was not, according to Aguirre, a passing crisis, but the direct fruit of a pastoral approach that had replaced truth with consensus, tradition with sociology, faith with sensation. The article, which at the time was greeted with embarrassed silence or annoyance by many official circles, pointed the finger at that drift that had become a system. What made the text even more cutting was the fact that Aguirre was not speaking from a distant observatory, but from within the reality most affected. In Argentina, he wrote, not only had vocations disappeared, but even religious marriages were now sociological rarities. The faithful had transformed themselves into partners, cohabitants, fluid figures, as if the sacrament were an outdated optional. The Church, reduced to an extra in the public debate, appeared in the newspapers only for its alleged faults, or for the politically incorrect positions attributed to it by the media. Aguirre, with the sober but clear tone that characterizes him, underlined a fact that today sounds like an epitaph. The mission of forming Christians and building a Catholic culture has been forgotten. His diagnosis was not isolated. It was reinforced by a broader judgment on the trajectory followed by the Church since the Second Vatican Council. The Argentine bishop recalled with bitterness how, 60 years after the closing of that council, what had been expected as a new spring had turned out to be a long, cold, and disoriented winter. The cry of Paul VI. Through some crack, the smoke of Satan has entered the temple of God, was taken up by Aguirre as confirmation of a tragic intuition, which, in the pontificate of Francis, seemed to have found its point of no return. But all this, at the time, was said with rare freedom, and a courage that few dared to exercise publicly. The election of Leo XIV marked a moment that many, even among the most skeptical, have defined as a rupture. Not so much for the person, and still little known to the general public, but for the signals that immediately imposed themselves with symbolic force. The choice of the name is already a declaration. Leo, like Leo XIII, the Pope of Rerum Novarum, the one who opened the 20th century with a strong, coherent Catholic social doctrine, an alternative to the ideologies of the time. And 14th, to indicate a continuation of that line, not another. No flaunted originality, no pastoral affectation, but a return to a spiritual royalty that is not ashamed to show itself. When the new pope appeared in the loggia, dressed in traditional vestments, without giving up the red mozzetta, without dramatic cuts or populist greetings, many held their breath. It seemed like the past, but it was instead a different future, a future that spoke again with the language of tradition, that returned to using the categories of truth and justice, and that did not seek to be accepted by the world, but to convert it. It was Archbishop Hector Aguirre himself who had already precisely denounced the ecclesial drift, who commented in an emblematic way on this turning point. The presentation of Pope Leo XIV, he wrote, brings to mind more glorious times. And it wasn't nostalgia, it was discernment. Glorious not because they were perfect, but because they were led by popes who were not afraid of their function, nor did they reduce it to a horizontal and sympathetic presence. Glorious because they were marked by a clear Catholic identity, even in the midst of storms. In his first public words, Leo XIV cited the encyclical Humanae Vitae, recalling without hesitation the meaning of marriage and family according to the Church, a gesture that, in the eyes of the media and certain curial circles, seemed provocative. But for those who, like Aguirre, had denounced the emptying of the sacraments and the trivialization of the marital bond, those words seemed like water in the desert. Without even naming him, the new pope positioned himself in perfect opposition to the rhetorical register that had characterized Francis's pontificate. Where clarity was eluded, Leo XIV chose doctrine. Where change was celebrated, he pointed to continuity. Where consensus was sought, he asserted authority. But even more than the content, it was the tone that changed radically. No jokes, no horizontal neologisms, no political slogans. The voice of Leo XIV immediately appeared as that of a pontiff who feels he is a guardian, not an innovator. Who knows he carries a responsibility, not a personal project. And in this, he seemed to embody, even without mentioning it, everything that Aguirre had hoped for. A return to the essential, a reconsecration of the papacy, a de facto denial of that figure of the bishop dressed in white who was around among journalists and sociologists, but who often seemed alien to the faith of the simple. The beginning of this pontificate has brought to the surface, as if by contrast, everything that had been tried to hide in previous years. And Aguirre's text today shines not for nostalgia, but for foresight. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.